Hello and welcome to Education 689. We are going to cover classrooms and schools in this lecture for our course Creative Thinking and Problem Solving. Please don't forget that our text for this course is Creativity in the Classroom, and this lesson is going to focus on chapters 5 and 10, chapters 5 and 10. So our learning purpose and objectives for classrooms and schools is identify and analyze philosophies, strategies, and challenges to establishing and maintaining creative classroom culture, and examine approaches school leaders can take in promoting creative school culture. When we talk about school leaders, and I'm going to reiterate this when we get to this portion of the lesson, but I want to establish it now. You are a school leader. So for the longest time as a classroom teacher, I really didn't envision myself as a school leader. And of course, yes, there are specified roles, namely the principal and an assistant principal, curriculum consultant, things like that. They are definite defined school leaders, but sometimes classroom teachers don't realize the influence that they can have within a school culture. And for the very fact that you are pursuing this professional development opportunity of your master's or your academically gifted certification, you are becoming a school leader. You may have already been one before you even started this journey, but you're definitely sharpening the saw, so to speak, in your efforts to become a school leader. So I want you to consider yourself one, and as we're talking for that portion of it, yes, you may have future plans to step into a formal leadership role, but even if you decide to stay in the classroom, you are a school leader. So our major assessment focus is prompt 6, create a classroom environment that supports motivation and creativity. And of course, you're going to be revisiting this on your creativity project, the major assessment of this course. And the outcome is tied to these specific standards. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump into 3 keys to creativity in the classroom. 3 keys to creativity in the classroom. So the first key, teaching the skills and attitudes of creativity, entails explicitly teaching students about creativity. That key was addressed in chapter 8. We talked about it in depth, that particular chapter. It includes teaching about the lives of creative individuals, the nature of the creative process, and strategies that can be used to generate creative ideas. The second key, teaching creativity supportive curriculum, includes at least 2 important features. First, we must teach students how individuals are creative in the disciplines they study. In science, for example, this type of teaching entails learning the processes of scientific investigation in addition to the concepts and generalizations resulting from such investigations in the past. This is more complex than teaching the 5 steps of the scientific method, although that is a place start. Real science rarely progresses in such neat and predictable steps. Learning how creative scientists operate entails learning the kinds of questions scientists ask and the methods they use to investigate them. It examines the obstacles that can impede progress, the circuitous paths that can lead to success, and the skills necessary to conduct investigations. Parallel kinds of knowledge can be examined for any field in which creativity emerges. But this kind of specialized discussion of creative processes is not enough. It also is essential to teach the rest of the regular curriculum in ways that are supportive of creativity. To coin a silly phrase, we need to creativize curriculum, as Starko says, considering both the content and the methods we use. So in chapter 6 and 7, we actually discussed that, at length. Please go back and revisit those if you want to find out more about what we're talking about when we say creativize the curriculum. But essentially what we want to do is make sure that we are building the needed knowledge base in ways that are compatible with building creative capacity in our students. And then, as you can tell, teaching to support creativity is not a part-time endeavor. It's not enough for students to know the content and skills that provide the grist and meal for creativity. They also need the third key, which is a creative, friendly classroom. A creative, friendly classroom uses teaching strategies that are supportive of creativity, but it's more than that. It also provides an atmosphere in which it is safe to take creative risks and where exploring creative ideas and interests is a normal part of the classroom routine. This is the place in which students develop the confidence and the motivation to be creative, the will, you might say, to turn the millstone. In this chapter, we will consider the type of classroom environment best suited to developing creativity and the many variables that go into creating it. And that's actually what we're going to start doing right here, where we're going to talk about guarding the flames within, guarding the flames within. So as we talk about guarding the flames within, a big part of this has to do with psychological safety. So I want you to think about those Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the other humanist researchers from the very first week when we started talking about the different researchers. One of them, if you'll kind of think back with me, Rogers, he used the analogy of a farmer and a seed when he was talking about psychological safety. Although farmers cannot force seeds to grow, they can provide the nurturing conditions that will permit the seed to develop its own potential. In the same way, teachers, therapists, and others hoping to promote human growth can establish the conditions of psychological safety that allow individuals to develop. Psychological safety is associated with three processes: acceptance of the individual, lack of external evaluation, and empathetic understanding. Think about how each of these is related to the research on creative environments just described. So, acceptance of the individual as having unconditional worth is at the core of psychological safety. This type of acceptance means that wherever his or her current condition, the person is seen as having value and potential. Some individuals are fortunate enough to find this type of acceptance in a warm, loving family. In such situations, the individuals know that no matter what they do, they are loved. The love and acceptance are not tied to passing tests, winning ball games, or playing concerts. They're unconditional. Such acceptance is part of the relatedness that is an essential element of intrinsic motivation. It is impossible for any teacher to provide all the advantages of a loving home in a few hours each day. And some of us in secondary content areas, we only see our students 50 minutes, 5 times a week. And that's if they come to school every week, if we don't have holidays. And so that's a lot of pressure sometimes to think there's no way that we're going to be able to make up that difference. It is possible, however, to have a classroom in which students are valued just because they are there, a room in which all students, no matter what their current situation or behavior, are seen as having potential. Unconditional acceptance does not mean all student behavior is acceptable. The most loving families have rules and clear consequences when they're broken. However, even when the behavior is not acceptable, the student can feel accepted if he or she is treated with respect and dignity. Unconditional acceptance can be manifested in many ways. Any act sending the message that students are important, valuable, and full of potential builds a foundation of psychological safety. Perhaps the most obvious type of acceptance is the teacher's willingness to actually examine a student's ideas, even when they initially appear strange or inappropriate. And of course, we know that this builds creativity. So this class is not a class that's fully focused on those 5 critical components of classroom culture, but that is something that is very important, and you want to reflect on: am I building a classroom culture that is thoughtful in the way that it is physically arranged, emotionally arranged, the way that it's managed, to where students feel safe to be themselves, to express their ideas, and also to know that they're going to be held accountable for making sure that the learning environment is conducive for all the learners. So psychological safety is critical. The second aspect of psychological safety is lack of external evaluation. Rogers believed that evaluation by external sources hinders psychological safety. It forces individuals to put up defenses and keeps them from being open to their own self-evaluation. Rogers believed that an internal locus of evaluation, which we talked about this in earlier chapters, the use of one's own judgment to determine the ultimate worth of a creative product, is a key to creative behavior. The final aspect and pinnacle of psychological safety is empathetic understanding. Empathetic understanding goes one step beyond acceptance. It accepts not only who the person appears to be, but also who he or she is inside. In empathetic understanding, we see the world from another's point of view, enter that person's private world, and still accept him or her. Empathetic understanding of all our students is a lofty goal, particularly for secondary teachers with enormous class loads, but it can allow students to feel safe and accepted in many difficult circumstances. For some students, a teacher's willingness to learn enough about them to try to see the world through their eyes may provide the key to both content learning and creative thinking. So a lot of times our students will just say like, man, I just like the vibe in here, or it's so chill in here. And we don't want to confuse, like a lax environment with an environment that promotes creativity. That's not at all what I'm saying. But a lot of time what they're feeling, what they're having trouble articulating is that deep sense of connectedness that the teacher has taken time to build within that classroom, within that student. I will say that it's been my experience that this is typically done explicitly. Teachers who do this really well, they up front explain this is a learning community, everyone is accepted here, and they take a lot of time to build relationships and make sure that there is an environment for civil discourse, that there's a way and a method to express ourselves in a way that is not offensive to anyone else. And so that's explicitly done and it's woven into the fabric of the classroom. For our gifted students, this is imperative. Many of them will not open up to you without having the psychological safety in place. So we definitely want to keep that in mind. The next thing that we want to talk about is intrinsic motivation. This comes from within as a positive response to the task itself. It spurs a person to explore, to persist, and to achieve based on the satisfaction of a task. Researchers have examined factors affecting motivation in a variety of activities, some creative, others not. Several types of studies have reported the impact of external constraints on work that was originally motivated internally. Such constraints might include rewards, deadlines, and overt supervision. In a variety of circumstances, the imposition of external controls actually can decrease intrinsic motivation for the targeted task. In their classic study, Lepper et al. Observed preschool students playing with magic markers. After identifying students who displayed a high level of interest in the markers, the researchers asked the students to draw some pictures with the markers. Some of the students were promised a reward if they drew the pictures. Interest in the markers, they drew the pictures. Others were not. Afterward, the students who had been promised a reward demonstrated less interest in the markers than those who had drawn pictures without the promised reward. It was as if the students could conceive of no other reason to draw once they had drawn for a reward. Drawing for the sake of drawing no longer seemed worthwhile. Similar findings have been observed for varying constraints and target behaviors. However, like virtually every other idea about creativity, this one also has examples that prove the opposite. Amabel's position on the importance of intrinsic motivation can be debated. Weisberg cited adult creators who were highly motivated by external rewards. Watson and Crick wanted the Nobel Prize for their modeling of DNA. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Mozart, Dickens, and others frequently worked for commission or contracts. Their creativity did not seem to be blunted by the promise of financial reward. It is possible that the importance of internal motivation changes developmentally or varies by task or by discipline. Motivation to engage in long-term scientific investigation seems likely to differ from motivation to complete a divergent thinking exercise. Higher intrinsic motivation has been associated with more creative products. However, extrinsic motivation is not always seen as problematic. So this is something where when we're talking about intrinsic motivation, it's very important to build it in our students, especially our gifted and talented students. But it is important to also note that external motivation can't be purely ruled out. You will see students as well. Grades are going to be very important to them. Class rankings are going to be very important to some of them. But I don't want us to confuse sometimes those rewards, for example, Nobel Prizes or, attention that they get from being creative, that external factor. In fact, I think it's silly for us to even discuss that. I mean, that's the whole reason that we have audiences sometimes for performances is, they need the outlet to be able to showcase their creativity. But I think it's important to understand that in those sorts of things are not going to be the primary reason that creativity is sustained in a classroom. We have to be able to intrinsically motivate our students. And we've talked about that earlier in the semester as well. Now I want to talk about creative self-beliefs. And so these are super cool. Creative self-beliefs, flow, and creative mortification really kind of go together here. These kind of work hand in hand. So our beliefs about our own creativity are important in shaping our creative behaviors. Our creative self-beliefs, also known as CSBs, influence whether we will engage in creative activities, how we'll persist in those activities when faced with challenges, and in the end, whether we will have creative achievements. Contemplating our own creative self-beliefs and those we foster in students is essential to creating a classroom environment supportive of creativity. There are at least 4 types of creative self-beliefs to be considered: creative self-concept, creative metacognition, creative self-efficacy, and creative mindset. So we're going to briefly talk about those 4. Make sure you read your chapter on these because they're very, very interesting. Oh, I see that I forgot creative metacognition here. I'll make sure to go back and add that underneath creative self-beliefs. I see that I forgot that one when I was making this particular slide. So creative self-concept is a global judgment about creativity, either generally, I am a creative person, or within a particular discipline, I am a creative writer. It tends to be stable across time or varied situations. The teacher described earlier did not have a strong creative self-concept. And so there's an example in the book about a teacher that relates to this. Creative self-efficacy also entails judgments about our creativity, but focuses on confidence in performing specific creative acts. It will vary with specific creative activities. For example, a person might have high creative self-efficacy regarding choreography, but low self-efficacy regarding designing original experiments. Creative metacognition, that's the one that's missing right here from the list, which I'll add. It entails beliefs based on knowledge of creative strengths and weaknesses in a particular situation, judging whether a creative activity is appropriate and feasible. It requires an individual to consider whether the task at hand requires a creative solution and whether their creative strengths are suitable to the needs. A related construct, creative mindset, reflects whether or not we believe creativity can be developed. So it works hand in hand with the concept of growth mindset. or is a fixed ability. So that kind of covers the 4 creative self-beliefs. Again, this goes hand in hand with the concept of creative flow and creative mortification. So creative flow is a powerful type of motivation. Csikszentmihalyi, who we talked about earlier in the semester, summarized decades of research examining happiness, focusing on the concept of optimal experience. Optimal experience is hard to describe, yet easy to imagine. It encompasses those moments when one feels life is in focus, exhilarating, and satisfying. For some, it may be the moment they obtain the summit of a mountain. For others, it may be understanding how the melodies of a symphony come together in a unified whole. Feeling the colors on a canvas become something new, or experiencing the birth of a child. Each of these experiences adds to our richness and complexity as human beings. In a sense, it helps us create ourselves. Csikszentmihalyi has research which essentially focused on these optimal experiences. He included thousands of people from all different walks of life, and I encourage you to read more about it in this particular chapter. The search for flow may be at the heart of much human discontent. For that reason alone, it seems worthy of further consideration. It certainly is related to intrinsic motivation. In fact, flow may be seen as the ultimate example of intrinsic motivation. It also seems to have ties to creativity. Many of the activities that traditionally elicit flow entail creative behavior. Artists painting, musicians practicing, and scientists absorbing in their work are classic examples of individuals in flow. Sawyer even describes the potential for group flow, in which groups of individuals, from musicians to business professionals, work together in a collective flow state. In this discussion, in your textbook, it examines the nature of flow and the conditions that occur conditions that allow it to occur. So please make sure that you take a little bit of time to examine flow, because the implications for schools are really important. If insufficient skill development precedes a challenging, potentially creative activity, students aren't going to have the scholastic tools, and they're not going to have the skill, the knowledge to be able to enter into flow. If they have the skills, but they're not given the conditions, such as the time, then it's going to be unlikely that they're ever pushed to be able to enter that level of flow. So it's a balance, and it's something that schools have to consider, and specifically teachers in classrooms. Am I ever giving my students the opportunity to tap into creative flow? The other one that I want to talk about is creative mortification. What if creative self-efficacy goes terribly wrong? You can end up with something that's the very opposite of flow, and that's mortification. Beghetto and colleagues found that experiences that cause creative mortification can originate in comments by valued teachers and coaches. I suspect the collapse of many people's interest in certain creative endeavors has to do with this concept of creative mortification. All critiques and feedback do not have negative results. So what causes this creative mortification when a person decides to completely stop pursuing a creative activity because of some deeply painful and personal experience? Beghetto and Dilley suggest there are 3 main variables that can lead to creative mortification: internal attributions, fixed ability beliefs, and the experience of shame. This is very important for us as teachers, because we need to really consider the role of feedback in our classrooms and make sure that we are practiced in giving academic feedback, always with an intent to construct, to promote positive growth, rather than what we consider to just be criticism. So that's very, very important. And on page 153 in your textbook, there is more about how important differentiating between just general criticism and constructive criticism, teaching our students the difference between the two and helping them actually advocate for feedback, but learning to give it to one another and learn and making sure that as teachers, we're giving it to our students in a way that builds their creativity rather than leads to a creative mortification. Sometimes as teachers, we don't realize the influence that we have on our students, and that's very, very important. So the next thing that we want to talk about, and this goes hand in hand, you can see how these really dovetail, is creating social and emotional learning with an eye for creativity in the classroom. As we think about creating classrooms that support creativity, it's clear that it's not just cognitive challenge. There's an emotional component to this as well. This parallels one of the most important areas of emphasis in 21st century education, which is social emotional learning. Schools have come to recognize that without the abilities to manage emotions, recognize emotions in others, and develop healthy relationships, the basic content of school subjects can't be put to use. In order for creativity to flourish, we need both the basics of social emotional learning and social emotional learning specific to creativity. So it's important for us to see, I put on the right, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. CASEL is the acronym that we use for it, CASEL. It's an organization focused on supporting evidence-based social and emotional learning as an essential part of schooling. Their model has formed the basis of initiatives across the United States for more than 25 years. While there are other models, the CASEL model is representative and includes key aspects of SEL found across models. It emphasizes the need for systematic development of social emotional learning across grade levels. So this is very important. If you can just take a moment and look at these: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. These are very important. This actually goes hand in hand with, on the left, is another list that I put in, and you can see that these go hand in hand. So this is Harvard's taxonomy project, and they created an Explore SEL site, which allows you to do just that. Notice I actually put the link here for you right below. It's called the Taxonomy Project. Please check it out because it talks not only about the CASEL framework, but it's also going to talk about the one on the left that I'm about to discuss with you. One of the very useful models for promoting social emotional learning creativity actually comes from the Henry Ford Museum. Henry Ford's modally curriculum for innovation includes actions, what are design steps as it's called in the model, that parallel those of other design learning models. It includes what's called the 6 habits of an innovator. These describe ways of seeing, thinking, and doing that are supportive of innovation. Another way to view these habits is as a social, emotional, fundamental framework for creative thinking. They need to be taught and reinforced just like other social, emotional skills. The modally habits include be empathetic. So notice how that dovetails exactly what we already were talking about earlier in the lesson today. Stay curious, take risks, learn from failure, challenge the rules, or better yet, invent them, and collaborate. And so in your textbook on pages 154 to 158, each one of these is going to be elaborated on with more depth and examples. So please make sure you check that out. And also, I definitely recommend that you check out this link to the taxonomy project. Really great ideas there for promoting social emotional learning for creativity. Next is teaching for independence with a focus on organization, motivation, and autonomy. So one of the first keys that we need to help us understand how to teach for skills of independent learning is that we need to teach students how to actually work independently. We need to plan a series of lessons that allow the slow release of independent work time. And we need to show them what it looks like, explain to them what it looks like. These lessons should be planned and executed with as much care, planning, and practice as any other teaching unit. And of course, you would overlay them with something that you're doing to build content. Major topics could include becoming independent, uses of independent work time, sometimes for the whole class, sometimes for a small group, sometimes for an individual, planning your time. So complete assigned tasks before going on to independent projects or choice activities. What to do if you're stuck, how to signal the teacher for assistance or a conference, expectations about noise, conversations, or other disruptions, rules about materials, what they can use, how to turn them in, and then choice activities and what to do when tasks are completed. The key here is that there actually has to be a strategy. It has to be structured. I know that in the past, some of my colleagues have tried to build this into their classrooms and then they've stopped it because they're like, they just don't know what to do with free time. You're right. They don't know what to do. They have to be taught what to do with free time. Once the procedures are established, independent work time can be initiated. The goal is to move students from seat work, during which they can be quiet, but for which all activities are chosen, directed, and monitored by the teacher, to a period during which many activities are planned, organized, and implemented by them. The first time you have independent work time, do not try to introduce a lot of new content. The important lesson is building that skill for independence. Give the students an assignment, preferably one with enough challenge that some students may practice getting assistance, and 2 or 3 choice activities. During the work time, do not try to give other instruction. You may wish to circulate, give student feedback on their independent work skills, but do not assist directly with content except through the procedures established for independent work time. They need to learn a little bit about how to struggle, how to use resources, how to properly use the strategies to ask for help. So then you can give your attention once they learn on working just the whole class working independently. Then you can actually segue to giving your attention to individuals so that you can work with giving them time to work as individuals so that you can work with small groups. This is a wonderful way to begin building in strategic small group time in your class. So some of the materials and structures that we use for independent learning can be anchor activities. And so these are things that sometimes we call independent projects, but anchor activities are tasks that students should move to when they've completed the given assignment, before class begins, when they are stuck waiting for help, or any other empty moment of the day. These are activities that they're typically working on independently. It could be a project that's related to the content that you're learning. It could maybe be a free choice read that maybe they're doing something with, but anchor activities are very important. The next thing that we could consider doing are centers. Centers are often things that we think of for only early childhood or elementary students, but this is not so. We can have centers all the way through graduation. Centers are things that students can do with when they are exploring. Perhaps maybe you have a unit, let's say that you're reading a Shakespeare play. Well, we never have enough time to cover everything we want to cover about the Elizabethan period, about all the different Shakespeare conspiracy theories. And so it would be fun to set up centers around the room, even if these are like virtual centers, like put some QR codes and let them use an iPad or laptops. And that would be easy to do, especially if if you're teaching multiple courses in the same classroom. And so you could have those set up, and that's something that they could do in their independent work time. So your book is going to go into some more examples of these, but they're fantastic ideas to implement menus, choice menus, anchors, centers, lots of different things like that. The next is about making sure that you have a classroom environment and routines that are conducive to creativity. The physical arrangement of the classroom can send messages to students about the role of independence, choice, and creativity in the class. Desks that all face the teacher make large group instruction simpler. They also send a message to students that the source of information is found in one place. Seelig described an experience in which she inadvertently discovered the impact of furniture arrangement on creative processes. In a simulation involving creative problem solving, one group of students had tables and chairs, while the other had only chairs. This turned out to be the key variable that affected the outcome of the simulation. Students who had only chairs immediately pulled together and began to collaborate. Those with tables remained anchored to their spots. Repeating the experience with other groups led to the same results to a great degree. The thinking of these very able college students was so framed by furniture that they could not seem to get past it. And recall that the basic artifacts of a classroom influence whether students feel they belong and want to engage. The study cited previously described the way gender-associated objects made students feel more or less welcome. But the same phenomenon can occur with any other set of groups. The physical setup of the classroom influences how and if students will interact. McIntosh writes, the types of spaces our students will experience, both physically and online. We don't want to forget about those virtual environments. Think about how these spaces may operate in classrooms because they will be the worlds for which we are preparing our students. So we have private spaces. These are the spaces we all need to stop and regroup alone, or perhaps by texting a close friend. I want you to think about in most of our schools, some of our students never get an opportunity all day long to have private spaces, maybe only when they're in a restroom stall, and that's it all day long. So we want to think about, are we building in opportunities? And I don't mean that they all need to have their own cubicles, but sometimes physical structures, such as like a reading nook toward the back of the class, or maybe even just making sure that when we are perhaps doing independent work, that we do give a little bit of quiet and downtime, some time for them to collect their thoughts privately before discussing collectively. So that's important. Group spaces, publishing spaces. So is there a physical or virtual space for them to share their ideas, vlogs, wikis, podcasts, slide shares? And then performance spaces. In performance spaces, ideas are shared verbally and through performance. Of course, again, these can be physical and virtual. Do we have a place in our classroom where students stand when they have something to present? Do we have a place for them to practice? We also have participation spaces, and then what we call the watching or spectator spaces. The book is going to go into this quite a bit more, so make sure you check those out. And then the last one is flexible grouping and organization. And so this has to do with the way deciding how various groupings impact motivation. We know that collaboration can be hindered or can be promoted through the way that we group our students. The book is going to go a lot into how to purposefully group students and then how to actually organize those activities that support them and the tasks themselves. So 4 key takeaways from Cohen's research are that cooperative tasks should have more than one answer and more than one path. No student should be able to come to the task with the solution in hand. I will tell you that sometimes with gifted students, this can be really challenging because some of them are so bright and they're simply, some of them are so knowledgeable about so many topics that it is challenging and you really have to think it through. So that's important. The second one is that cooperative tasks should be intrinsically motivating and offer challenge to all students. They should work together to create a worthwhile product, not simply earn team points. Number 3, group tasks should allow students to make different kinds of contributions by demanding a variety of abilities and skills. So this is where the purposeful grouping comes into play, making sure that they all have something that they can contribute. And typically this means having assigned jobs, even allowing them to define what those roles are to a degree, but having a space for them to show up, be creative, and their creativity to be acknowledged in a unique way. And then number 4, cooperative tasks should involve multiple media and multi-sensory experiences in addition to traditional text. And this is where your creativity can come into play in designing those opportunities for them. I've included this video. It is from a famous YouTuber teacher. Her name is Teacher Casey, and she is a rich well of information about how to incorporate flexible seating. Flexible seating was one of the examples I gave you early on about it's kind of what has evolved from that study with where they were just given chairs and they were given tables and chairs. She's going to talk about that in this video, but she also talks about a lot of other options for flexible seating, and she gives examples of how they can be implemented in classes. So take some time to check out that video. Next, we want to switch from just the classroom to actually talking about developing a culture of creativity in schools. And I want to reiterate, we're switching to chapter 10 now, but I want to reiterate that you are a school leader. So I don't want you to think that just because you spend the majority of your time in one classroom, that you are not a school leader. Many of our principals often say that, without teachers taking on leadership roles, whether they are formal leadership roles like department heads or informal leadership roles, where they don't have official titles, they are just getting the work done, helping their colleagues, being just great examples of how to build relationships with students. Many of our principals say the work could not be done without that. So in creative organizations, problem solving and innovation often take place in teams. Schools, too, have teams. These include grade level or subject area groups, curriculum, planning groups, school improvement teams, etc. If those teams are to function creatively, they need many of the same things required by teams in other organizations: time, resources, and recognition for creative efforts. So Ekval and I don't even know how to pronounce this last name. I'm going to attempt it. Ryehammer, I think is the way you would say it. I've never actually heard it spoken, so I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's on the bottom of page 363 in your text. These two researchers identified 10 dimensions related to a creative organizational climate. Number 1, challenge. How challenged and committed are employees to the work? Number 2, freedom. How much flexibility do employees have to decide how to do their job? Number 3, idea time. Do employees have time to think things through before having to act? Number 4, dynamism. Is there enough sense of moving forward? Number 5, idea support. Are there resources available to support new ideas? Number 6, trust and openness. Would Rogers find this a psychologically safe place? So referring back to what we spoke about with the researcher Rogers and his definition of psychologically safe. Playfulness and humor. Is there room for fun? Conflicts. Is the workplace full of conflict, and how are the conflicts managed? And then I'm sorry, the other two are not on this screen. I'll make sure to go back and put them. Debates. Are there lively discussions about the work? Remember, debate can be very healthy as long as it's done with civil discourse in full manifestation. And finally, risk-taking. Are risks and failures an expected part of innovation? So if we go up here, remember, what these habits for social emotional learning are. These habits, the modally habits, notice how many of them are parallel to um, these 10, what we call habits um, of creative organizational climate. So it's something that you want to keep in mind as a school leader. Once you are given a leadership role, you want to make sure that these things are in place for your team. Also, if some of these are missing from your existing school culture, consider ways that you, your group, and or one of the formal school leaders can begin implementing some of them. What changes could be made to the environment to include more of these? Your book is going to discuss each one of these in greater detail, so make sure you check those out. And we want to talk about creative leadership. And so this is very important because creative leadership, leading for creativity specifically, is something that eventually many of you are going to have to consider. You will become leaders, whether that is a school level leader, a district level leader. And these are things that you want to keep in mind. Lead with empathy, challenge assumptions, make experiments happen, and share your process. So these are the 4 outcomes that the founder of the D-School K-12 Lab, Susie Wise, suggests for developing a practice of design thinking. Whether you're teaching students to solve problems or whether you're working with colleagues, this would work. But sometimes we simply overcomplicate things. And so lead with empathy. Empathy is at the heart of human-centered design. Leading with empathy requires that we be able to move beyond our own thinking toward the realities of others' lives. It isn't done from the sidelines, but by becoming closer to the people and situations we are trying to serve. Empathy requires less talk and more listening. If you are hoping to use design thinking to innovate in school, it can't be done without working to deeply understand how others experience your school. The second, of course, is challenging assumptions. Wise calls this mode the opposite of keep calm and carry on. It requires shifts in thinking, facilitated through phrases such as what if and in what ways might we. Challenging assumptions, when put to work for design thinking, is positive and full of possibilities. It assumes change is possible. Number 3, make experiments happen. Design thinking is a hands-on prototype building, let's just try it process. Rather than talking and planning through seemingly endless meetings, try something. Start small, but start. If it doesn't work, try something else. And number 4, share your process. Talk to your team. Talk to your other colleagues. Share what works, what's not working, and what is puzzling you. Design works best when it is collaborative and breaks through the silos in which most of us spend our workdays. And so it's very important to consider, what if you're not yet in charge? There are 3 things that your book mentions, and I also would like to underscore them here. You could actually be the change maker in your school. As we mentioned in the previous 4, make experiments happen, make suggestions, try things, collaborate with down the hall partners who are also creative. Look across your school and see who those other change makers are and begin to form alliances with them, share resources, share experiences with them, go on field trips together, plan cross-curricular things together. If you are a gifted and talented teacher, you have lots of latitude to do these kind of things with other gifted and talented teachers. So take advantage of that. You might be a creativity island in your school. Your classroom may be the only one at first. It may be the only one kind of doing things They're just a little bit outside the box, pushing students outside their comfort zones. That's okay. Embrace being on the creativity island at the same time that you're looking for others to collaborate with. And then lastly, if you cannot create change in your school, if your leader shuts down your ideas and you don't feel that there's a way to grow in that environment, seek a creative school culture. That may mean changing schools. That may mean looking for other departments in which you could serve within your district. Look for other ways that you could develop that creativity within your district. Um, and look for those, what we like to call creativity mentors. They're there. Trust me, you're not the only one who is desiring a more creative workplace and a more creative classroom. So those are just three things that you can do if you're not in charge. So I'd like to leave you with this quote that creativity is experimenting, growing, taking risks, breaking rules, making mistakes, and having fun. And we mean this for our students, but we also need to embrace these as teachers as well. So for the closing thoughts, I want to just admonish you that continue to seek ways to establish and maintain a creative classroom and school culture. We can do it through strategic philosophies, activities, and structures. As you continue your personal creative pursuit this week, so we're going into discussion board 5, determine if you have ever been in flow when you're doing whatever this pursuit is. So within these 5 weeks of this creativity pursuit, have you ever entered that flow zone? What did it feel like? What was the environment like? If you have not, what do you think is preventing it? What are you learning about the social, emotional, and environmental factors that affect your motivation to work on your creative pursuit? How can this inform and or justify choices you make in your classroom to promote creative culture? Make sure you carefully read chapters 5 and 10 of Creativity in the Classroom and complete the assignments on Moodle. I've included a video at Write. It's about 45 minutes. It's fantastic. Again, it's another one of those that it's great to put on in the background when you're cooking, exercising, or even doing your creative pursuit. It's by the American Psychological Association, and it's called Creativity in the Classroom. It encapsulates this lesson, and it actually underscores much of what we've discussed in this course. I hope you enjoy it, and let it function as a cherry on top of the lecture series for this course. Have a wonderful week.